What are you buying?
This game's shit. Okay, that was a little unfair, but thanks to a shipping error, my copy of Metal Gear Solid 5 arrived a week late, so I'm a little bit upset. So instead, over the weekend, I sat down and forced myself to finish playing this game. And that alone should sum up my overall feeling towards this game. Now, this game isn't actually shit, but I personally don't believe it's anywhere near as good as other people say it is, namely the hardcore Resident Evil fans who have been raving on about how supposedly great it is and how it's a step back in the right direction after Resident Evil 5 and 6. And yes, there is some truth in that. It is a step back in the right direction, but that's all it is. A step. A step back from the over-the-top silly action of 5 and 6, but several steps away from being anywhere near as good as Resident Evil 4, which in my opinion is still the best game in the series. So before I start tearing this game apart, I'll quickly sum up the game and what it did well. So Resident Evil Revelations 2 is the 21st game in the series and an indirect sequel to the first Revelations game. It stars Claire Redfield for the first time in 10 games and tells a new story where she and Ellie wannabe Moira Burton get kidnapped and taken to an island prison / research facility. Okay, so when I say new story, I really mean it's the same generic Resident Evil story. In fact, the setup for this game is so similar to Resident Evil Code Veronica and felt so recycled, my bit of skepticism was pretty high going in. Oh, and Barry shows up too with a psychic girl. So I do have a few compliments to give. First, it's very nice to be playing as Claire Redfield again, as she's one of my favourite characters in the series, and I always felt that she was a lot more relatable than Jill ever was. The game's opening does a pretty good job at setting up an effective atmosphere. Crawling around with just a knife had me thinking, hey, maybe this is actually going to be more stealth focused with challenging enemies. Maybe Capcom has taken pointers from Naughty Dog's The Last of Us. But no, 15 minutes in and the game gave me a gun and it turned into a bad Resident Evil 4. And from there on out, Revelations 2 just continued to disappoint me because it simply just doesn't do anything new and it's not even particularly scary or challenging. Now, you can bitch all you want about Resident Evils 5 and 6, but at least the monster encounters in those games were challenging, and intensity was drawn often from the overwhelming number of enemies, plus having enemies that could shoot back for a change really mixed things up. However, in Revelations 2, the over-designed monsters attack in small groups and behave exactly like Ganados from Resident Evil 4. So basically there was no surprises, and actually most of them drop in 2 solid headshots. So ammo was never ever scarce for me. I don't know why fanboys are raving about how it's supposedly a return to the old school ammo scarcity of old games. Maybe I'm just better than you. You know what game did do ammo scarcity and difficulty really well recently? The Evil Within. To which a narrow-minded fan then retorted, that's just a Resident Evil 4 clone. As if saying that is some kind of insult since Resident Evil 4 is still a better game. And you know what game did it even better? The Last of Us. And it does feel like Capcom has taken a little bit of inspiration from it. Barry's little girl partner, whose name I can't remember, can see enemies through walls like Joel could, which was a mechanic that I never liked and always turned off. You can sneak up behind enemies and stick a knife in them. However, in The Last of Us, Joel had a limited number of shivs and there was a huge risk of instant death if you screwed up. But in Revelations 2, stealth kills just felt like another way to kill things, and if it didn't work, I could still unload some bullets and be on my way. Even Moira feels inspired by the character of Ellie, in that she swears a lot and has a teen attitude.
Fuck in a moist barrel of fuck. Well, fuck that place very much. Haha, fuck you too.
However, Moira fails to be anywhere near as interesting as Ellie because she has no real personality besides swearing at everything and telling us how much she hates Barry.
Fucking Barry!
Anyway, back on topic. The combat in Revelations 2 is very dull because most of the enemies pose little threat and attack in small numbers. There's no crazy dudes with chainsaws, no terrifying Gyarados, no regenerators, no tyrants. There are Ouroboros monsters recycled from Resident Evil 5, but again, they pose little threat and aren't visually terrifying. And if we're gonna talk visuals, let me just say it. This is an incredibly average looking game. The environments are very dull and uninspired. I would argue that this game only looks slightly better than the HD remaster of Resident Evil 4. And it's not like this game was ported from handheld like the first Revelations. It was developed for consoles. Now, I am in no way a graphics whore, but I genuinely expect sequels in a series to look better than in the previous games, especially ones that came out 10 years ago. Another of my many grievances with this game is the episodic formula and how painfully linear it makes the experience. While yes, it's true, 5 and 6 were pretty linear too, my gripe with this game being linear is because so many people raved about this being a more old school Resident Evil game, which it just simply isn't. When I think classic Resident Evil, I think of how you'd be dumped into a giant open area with no idea what you were supposed to do, and you just had to wander around trying to figure shit out. Resident Evil 4 also did this, albeit in a more streamlined way. You would gradually unlock new areas of the village and castle, and return later often with more deadly enemies waiting. In Revelations 2, you just run in a straight line as Claire, and then re-explore the same areas at a different time 20 minutes later as Barry, which just feels boring and tedious, unlike in Resident Evil 4, where there were large gaps between the re-exploration of areas. It's just simply not fun to tread through the exact same area for 2 chapters in a row. Although, thankfully, in the last part of the game, Capcom stopped recycling its assets and the game actually got a little interesting again. Now, here is where I issue a spoiler warning. I'm about to start talking about specific plot points, so click the annotation to skip ahead unless you don't care. So during the game, Claire and Moira are being watched and monitored with these pulse sensing bracelets that react to fear, and at one point they survive an explosion, to which Claire exclaims, "She probably thinks we died in that. This is our chance to get the upper hand on her," even though their bracelets are still on, and later a computer monitor confirms that it was registered that they're clearly still alive. I'm sorry Claire, but when did you become so fucking stupid? Then there's a plot twist about a bad guy that is actually a bad guy, which by now is as predictable of a plot twist as there being a mole in the new season of 24. He then transforms into the laziest looking boss I've seen in the series so far, and I shit you not, they recycled the growls from the Nemesis. Then, in traditional Resident Evil fashion, a facility self-destructs. Well, that is old school, I guess. The last part of Barry's last episode is where the game actually finally started to feel like an old school Resident Evil game to me. Mainly because he was suddenly in a mansion, but the music and slow pacing was finally working. So, you might be thinking, I've been unfairly comparing Revelations 2 to Resident Evil 4, especially since I liked the first Revelations game despite it sharing a lot of the flaws I have with this game. The reason I forgave the shortcomings of the first game is because it was a port of a Nintendo 3DS game. This game was made for consoles and yet feels like little effort was put into it. And just for the record, I also compared Resident Evil 4 to Evil Within The Last of Us, to which The Last of Us in my opinion is a superior game of all three. This game just feels so rushed and recycled, like Capcom was playing it safe. They literally copied and pasted a puzzle from Resident Evil 4. So I'm going to spend the last part of this review going through things that need to change for the next game, in my opinion. 1. Bring back Resident Evil 4's inventory system. Sure, it was a little clunky, but it made more fucking sense than the slot system Capcom has dragged back from the first games, where a key and a shotgun somehow take up the same amount of space. Since weapon changing has now been assigned to the D-pad, just add a hotkey feature for the weapons you want. 2. Get rid of the stupid companions. It's sucking all the tension away having someone with you constantly helping you fight. Why were the original games so tense? Because you were alone and everything was horrible. Why was Resident Evil 4 still incredibly tense? Because Leon was isolated and alone for about 80% of the game, and having Ashley around just gave you another thing to worry about. Plus, she didn't steal your ammo. Yes, I am aware Ellie accompanies you through the entire game of The Last of Us, but the enemies in that game were programmed to ignore her and just hate on you, so you still felt pretty alone against the world. 3. Bring back challenging enemies. Introduce enemies you're better off running away from or hiding from. Remember the Garradors? Remember how they were blind but hypersensitive to sound and could insta-kill you? 4. If you really want to head back to the traditional survival horror direction, ditch the linear/episodic approach. If you're gonna dump me in a giant rundown facility on an island, actually dump me there and let me figure out what I'm supposed to do without a big arrow telling me where to go. Basically, drop me in the deep end of hell, keep the Resident Evil 4/Last of Us controls, make enemies hard, stealth a common necessity, and make me feel overwhelmed, not bored. It's called survival horror. Survival should be challenging. I actually feel better now. So before I finish this video, let me clarify. This game isn't actually terrible. It's not broken and it does everything that it wants to do, and I can see why a lot of fans enjoyed this game. As I said, it's not terrible. It's a passable game, but for me, it just left more than a little to be desired, and I just couldn't get past how recycled and uninspired the whole game felt. Resident Evil Revelations 2 gets a 5.5 from me, for the average amount of minutes I can handle playing Hotline Miami.